I'm Costas Isichos from Greece.
I'm Hendrik Weber from Norway.
This is Dateline News and Conversation. There's a lot going on, but before we begin, I've been asked to remind our friends of Crimea, friends of Russia, that the Friends of Crimea, Friends of Russia have a Telegram channel that aggregates the latest global news on interactions with the international community. I'm going to put this in at the end of the show, but the address is t.me/one word Crimea Voice. t.me/Crimea Voice. It's been a while since the three of us have done a show. Costas has been deeply involved in the elections in Greece. Hendrik has a business that he's had to run. But tonight, we're back, and we hope to be able to do this on a regular basis. So the topics tonight, among whatever happens to pop up, are Yevgeny Prigozhin. What was that? Somebody has a puppy dog going there. We'll talk about the Turkish President Erdogan, who yesterday released, I think it was 8 Azovstal Nazis, returned them back to Ukraine, breaking the agreement that was signed between Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine last year. We'll talk about the United States constantly escalating this conflict in Ukraine, now with talk of sending cluster bombs, which are against a special treaty signed by 110 countries at the United Nations, but not Russia, not the United States, and not Ukraine. And then we'll talk about what's really going on in terms of this special military operation, Ukraine's counteroffensive, and who knows what else might come up. So let's start with the Prigozhin affair. Costas, we'll start with you. What do you think this was all about? Do we still not know what really went on? So from where you sit in Greece, what do you think was really going on with this Prigozhin mutiny?
Well, as you implied in your question, I think that we still are missing some pieces of information, key information, on what led to this. I don't know if the word mutiny sounds okay, but it seems it was a mutiny. But was it a mutiny, or was it something more of a mutiny? So first of all, there were signs that this person, Yevgeny Prigozhin, for many months was attacking the leadership of the defense of the Russian Federation, of the Ministry of Defense, naming the minister and other top generals and staff, military staff, as, almost calling them traitors. Sometimes I think he did use that word. And, this was right outside any type of political critique, which in any country and in any political dialogue exists. But this overcame, what the red lines might be. And it seemed that this was escalating more and more, not in words, but in deeds. So, the last few days before he started his march onto Moscow, it seems that the secret services of many Western countries, especially the United States, at least for 48 hours before it happened, they somehow knew something was going to happen as it did. So, in my opinion, when a country is waging a defensive political struggle, a military struggle, the use of mercenary armies does have dangers. It does have dangers for any democracy, for any country that uses this type of a military manpower and military armaments, which in its command, mainly in the front lines, as it was in the case of Mr. Prigozhin, was a mercenary army. And I don't know if mercenary armies can work under state control or under government's control. It seems that sometimes they cross some red lines. I'm not just talking about Mr. Prigozhin, but we have seen it with Blackwater in the United States and other mercenary armies around the world. So, you know, it was a tough decision. Of course, I can see the yes and no's on this question. Anybody can talk about it and have a dialogue on this, but it seems that it overcame the red lines, and now Mr. Prigozhin doesn't seem to be sorry about what he said. Of course, he tried to reorganize his thoughts when he spoke after to the press after his telephone call with the president of Belarus, who mediated, as it seems, between the Russian government and Prigozhin in order that no bloodshed should be, no more bloodshed, especially between Russians, which would have meant this, a spark of some sort of a civil war, which of course would have been one of the greatest gifts to the United States and its allies at this situation. So I will just finish this, my first thoughts on this, saying that I don't think we have all the pieces yet. I don't know how the connection of Western powers and Western secret services to this character exist or not. And if they do, I hope they come into light. But I don't think this move was a solitary move without any other players within the Russian Federation and outside the Russian Federation. So this is a very, very delicate subject to talk about. And in my opinion, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have all the information which one should have in order to have a more concrete summary, political summary on what happened and what might happen in the near future, because I don't know if this is the final word on behalf of this type of people who have mercenary armies or other types of power outside government, state control, and democratic rules.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hendrik, when you comment, you might also comment on, did President Putin appear weak when he allowed Prigozhin to go to Belarus, to Minsk? So go ahead, take it away, Hendrik.
First of all, I want to agree with Costas. I think we don't know everything, and we don't have all the information. But that's maybe not so important. What is astonishing for me is that our mainstream media all the time was writing that the Wagner Group and especially, of course, Prigozhin was a new Hitler, Putin's cook, who is involved in war crimes in Ukraine. And directly after this coup, or when it runs, 2 weeks ago, it was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, then the mainstream media changes directly and said, oh, now he is the good guy. He is the guy who will crush Putin's regime and take over Russia. And that is, of course, really stupid. And it was never his intention, I think. It was a coup against, as Costa say, against the leaders of the defense ministry. He has said several times in the whole war that he is not very happy with the defense ministry, with delivery of weapons, with support, and so on. Also, other leaders, for example, the Chechen Republic leader Kadyrov said the same. That the Russian military is ineffective and should be better organized, should be faster or whatever. But when this coup happened, if we won't call it a coup, then we saw directly that everybody, both the military, all the leaders, all political parties, the whole population changed or not changed, but stand very behind the President Putin. So he's not weakened at all in this situation, I think. The opposite is right. He is in a much more safer position now as he was before the war started, I think. He has the support from almost all political parties and the whole society. So all these media articles that he is weak, we have heard this and could read this since 2000, since the year 2000, when he comes to power for the first time. Every month we read, now President Putin is finished in Russia, and there are much people against him, rallies against him, and that was never the case. I think this agreement with the Belarusian president Lukashenko is maybe more or less a diplomatical thing to solve this situation. In this way, nobody loses his face. President Putin had to do something against this coup of the Wagner Group. But with the solution from Alexander Lukashenko, everybody could find a way out of this, because it would be almost impossible to put all these guys in prison. 3,000 or 4,000 people, including the leaders of the Wagner Group. That would be almost impossible, I think. So this looks for me more like a diplomatical solution. Nobody's losing its face. And as Costas say, we don't have all the information, what was behind, but I think the situation is solved now. It doesn't matter for Russian society, for the Russian military, or for the Russian war in Ukraine. It doesn't matter. This situation is over, I think. Of course, there are many things in the background, finding maybe here and there people who were supporting this coup, but I think it doesn't matter anymore, really. That's my take on that.
Yeah, that's interesting from both of you. Costas mentioned the possibility of other foreign intelligence services being involved. It's been widely reported that MI6 had a lot to do with it. And, you know, the United States CIA has been involved in all of this for many, many years, and it is continuing to operate here in Russia. There's still some NGOs here. There's still an embassy in Moscow. They're not providing any services, but wherever there's an embassy, there is a military component and a CIA component. And I do know, because I've been talking to some friends here in Yalta and also in Moscow and Petersburg, they do not support President Putin. There are those who, from even before the special military operation, have not supported him. And I know the United States CIA and the MI6 have been using those people and people like Navalny to create chaos, disturbance, and division in the Russian society. As you pointed out, right now, It does not seem to be having any effect on the Russian people, but it is playing out across social media and the mainstream media from the United States and Europe. So I hope it's over. Personally, I've stopped speculating. I still think that there's more to this than meets the eye. And I think the three of us agree on that. Let's shift
maybe
to another.
maybe I can ask you a thing. You're living in Russia. I was in Russia last time in November last year, I think. Yeah, and when I'm in the restaurant, standing outside and smoking a cigarette, I come in contact with some students or somebody who's standing there. You know, it's always social outside. And several people ask me why I'm here, what I'm doing. And I ask them, do you support the military operation or whatever? And several of these young guys said to me, normally we not support President Putin. We think for internal politics, there are other politicians, other parties who are better. But in this situation, we are fighting against the West, the collective West. And that's why we are supporting President Putin. And that's not only one voice I heard from a young student. It's also a lot of other people I'm in touch with in Russia. As you say, not everybody is supporting President Putin, but in this situation where they feel a real danger, not only from Ukraine, but from the collective West, then they are supporting the president, because this is the most important thing at the moment. And after this solution is solved, or after this problem is solved, they're coming back maybe to other political parties or internal views where they are not agreeing with President Putin and his political party. But what's your take? Maybe Costas, you have also people in Russia, and you're talking to them.
Well,
you have opinion.
Yeah, I've been coming here since 2016, and in all of the time that I've been coming here, I have heard a consistent response from young people. They absolutely agree that there is corruption in the government. Many of them that I spoke to, and these are like young college-age students, we're supporting Navalny. Now, when we fast forward to Prigozhin, who accused the military and the government of corruption and treason, there are young people, maybe for a variety of reasons, who say, yep, we agree. We think that Prigozhin was right. And, you know, I've heard the same thing from Russian friends and Russian people in the years that I've been here about the corruption in the Russian government. So I have to say that there's a sector, a demographic in Russia that is not supportive. I think maybe more among the young people, under the age of 30 perhaps, who would be in that category. And then I've often wondered if the fear of being drafted, called up, and sent to the front has had that adverse effect on young people. All I can say is I do not believe there is any significant movement of young people to protest against this special military operation and the decisions of President Putin and the military of defense. So that's just my take on the ground. I have to agree with both of you that Putin's popularity was, the last I saw was at 81% favorability. They haven't done a recent poll, or not that I've seen, but nevertheless, his popularity is extremely high. I would say unprecedented and unparalleled, certainly anywhere in Europe or the United States of America. So, Henrik, that's my take.
Well,
Costas?
just a few thoughts on Hendrik's comments and questions, which I think are to the point. I do agree with you, especially in Russian history. The Russian people are quite unique in some things. One of them is that no matter of their differences in domestic issues, and I'm talking about the patriotic war in 41, 45, the Civil War during the October Revolution, or any other types of even the Napoleonic Wars. You will find in Russian history that the Russian people always unite in times of peril and invasion behind their leaders, no matter if they like them or not. This is part of their history. It's part of their nature. And I'm sure other peoples might be jealous of that type of uniqueness. Not too many people have that as a quality. Some might regard it as a weakness. But in times of perils, when countries unite and people unite, it's much more difficult for the aggressor, whoever he might be, to achieve his goals. The last thing that I want to mention, which I think is also interesting, and I'm really angry at the loss of credibility of any type of information from Western media. I mean, this is really a joke. We have been hearing in Greece reproductions from Western media that for the last 2 years, Mr. Putin is dying, he's ill, he has leukemia, he has cancer, he has doubles. This is not Putin really, it's someone else who looks like Putin, but actually it's not Putin or whatever else. We might even have extraterrestrials helping the Russian Federation at this point, as far as the Western media is concerned. But, the question of Prigozhin, as Hendrik mentioned, is really a joke. But this guy, who is an oligarch, who surely made his money not in the truest terms of credibility, and he is probably in the heart of any existent corruption in the Russian Federation. He's a product of corruption. He cannot make a march against corruption. He does not have the credibility to do that. So this is another joke from Prigozhin. So you see, the Western media would change their views and their critiques and their analysis, not only week by week, day by day, but even hour by hour as things, continued. So I think we must have a lot of faith on the Russian people, who seem to have a lot of wisdom. Their critique, I agree with Regis. I also have contacts and friends, and they're not happy about everything. They also talk about things they don't like in the domestic economic issues or the economy or whatever. But now this country has been targeted by Washington and its allies to be another Yugoslavia, a repetition of Yugoslavia, and dismembering it into little pieces and little oligarchs and big oligarchs all around this Russian Federation and their provinces in order to plunder it for the next 100 years. So this is a war against the Russian Federation, and it's only natural that the Russian people will be united on this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the majority of the Russian people do realize, because Putin has made it really clear of late, that this is a war of survival for the Russian Federation and the Russian people. He's made that very clear. And in my conversations with people, I am constantly bringing that up because sometimes I'm not sure that everybody is paying attention. They realize they're in a conflict, but do they realize the magnitude and the seriousness of this conflict? As an American, I'm very much aware for many, many years now of Washington's intent to balkanize, break up, and to rape and pillage all of its resources. It has been the public policy, publicly declared in And several of the think tanks, the most infamous is the RAND report, which states it very, very clearly. Regime change, break up the country, and steal its resources. And so I really do think, as both of you are saying, I think the Russian people understand, and in times of peril like this, they join together. Costas, you mentioned something. You mentioned the media, and I think there's two parts to this. The media, on the one hand, is constantly, Western media, United States especially, spinning everything, and many times spinning it 180 degrees. They say the exact opposite of what is actually happening. It's ludicrous when you know what the facts are, when you see it with your own eyes. But you know, the other part of this media problem is censorship. And many of us have felt that. They have many ways of doing it. They can shadow ban anybody's YouTube channel, Facebook page, Telegram, whatever. They can actually manipulate the number of subscribers and the number of views that people get, and pro-Russian people, whatever. They can even use their search engines to make sure that when people search for information, our posts, our articles, our videos don't even show up. And so this information war is multi-layered. It's overwhelming. And I think that Russia's not doing a very good job to combat, to fight on that level. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Hendrik, you first, and then Costas.
You are complete right. Russia is still 20, 40 years behind the US in the kind of information warfare. I don't know what to do with that. It's almost impossible to talk to anybody in the Russian society or Russian media or Russian government about it, because it looks like for me that they don't understand what you're meaning. And on the other side, they say always, yes, but we want to tell the truth. And that is right. But if you hear a speech of Mr. Lavrov, he comes with thousands of facts, and he can name all the agreements done, the international agreement and this and that. In Article 5 or Article 6 is standing this and that. But nobody hears it because it's too boring to hear it. And the US or Western media comes up with one emotional story about something, and everybody is crying, oh yeah, see, there are the Russians, these evil guys. So it's really difficult, I think, to change this Russian view to information warfare. Because I think they have this feeling that if they're starting this kind of information campaign, they would be liars. They would not say the truth, and Russians don't like it. Russian media or Russian politicians or Russian diplomats, they want to have these facts from A to Z and everything. But this is not something they catch people. So the US is much better at this, unfortunately.
Costas, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have to agree. Although I think that what leads Western media at this point to be to magnetize consciousness and control consciousness of people is a process that has to do with education, has to do with critical thinking that does not exist in the West. It has to do with the younger generations, which are captivated by the media in the internet, where they just read a paragraph at the most. They key words are used in the Western media: dictator, murder, and so on. And this repetition of words gets into your conscience, and you do not. It's like fast food. It's bad for your health, but a lot of people are addicted to it. So I would say that, you know, this type of fast food media that abstracts or takes away critical thinking from people, and especially the younger generations, has to do with what the future is hiding from us. And I think that it's a science, how to lie, when to lie, and how to convince somebody you're telling the truth, although you're the biggest liar in the world. Now, this is a very huge subject, and I think that Russian scientists in journalism, in analytical thinking, in the field of reportive and investigating journalism. Reggie, when you conduct an interview, you make questions that sometimes are not easy to answer, most of them, or they require from us not just a yes and a no, but we have to utilize our way to support what we're saying. This is completely inexistent in existence in the West. And if there are a few journalists who have done that before, well, some of them are dying in London, like Julian Assange, or, you know, other journalists who have tried to put out the truth, have paid dearly of what they have dared to do. So this is a very big subject, and I do agree with Hendrik and with you that Russia has to find quick answers and a quick antidote. It does not mean to copy what they're doing, but it does mean that you have to find ways to captivate critical thinking, to make people ask questions to themselves. And this is a very difficult thing to do, but it has to be done. There's no other way.
Let me give you one example. Every day in Norwegian media is standing some experts who are telling about the war situation in Ukraine. These experts are always the same people, and they are coming all the way up with the same answers for the same questions. Yes, the war is going well, and we are astonished how bad Russian military is organized. Always the same. But there you get this answer. If I would ask a Russian journalist or a Russian expert, oh, it would be difficult, because they would tell me a 1 hour story about the situation and what has happened on the ground, and if not, and it's not confirmed this, but maybe yes, maybe no. It's a complete different kind of thinking when it comes to journalism here in the West and there.
I agree.
Yeah, you know, one thing that I can say in regards to this is a show like this, for example, is not going to appeal, is not going to excite a mass audience. It's too intellectual. There's too much discourse. There's too much nuance of opinion, and they can't absorb that. So the people who will watch this will be more interested in quality, in the fact that people are having a discussion using critical thinking, using facts, using opinion, using nuance, is not appealing to a wide audience. They just, for all of my lifetime, because of television and advertising in the United States, Costas, I like the phrase you used, the fast food news. Yeah, everything has been fast food. It used to be 30-second sound bites. You know, now it's like 15-second sound bites. If you can't consume it and get this point in 15 seconds over and over and over again, you can't pay any attention to it. So I think what we're trying to do is to not change the whole world, but to reach out to a very small minority of people around the world who are dying for this type of intelligent conversation. That's what I think. And I think we have to keep trying, in spite of the fact that, we think, we're not changing the world. We're not changing the outcome of this special military operation. But, as Scott Ritter said on his tour, one handshake at a time. And I think that's very effective. And on the other hand, we cannot stop. We cannot surrender our voices to the mainstream and to the Western United States narrative. Let's move on, because the next topic was the release of Azovstal Nazis by President Erdogan. To remind our viewers, an agreement was made between Moscow, between Turkey and Ukraine, that these captured Nazi military, captured by the Russian military, and were held, and were going to stand trial. But somehow an agreement was made to transfer them to Turkey, where President Erdogan would keep them there until the end of this war. Apparently, Erdogan broke that agreement. Hendrik, your thoughts on the meaning, the significance of what just happened yesterday?
I think it's really difficult to understand, but that's maybe the topic all the time with President Erdogan. He's a little bit difficult to understand. But let me remind you first, or us first, for one other thing, and that is Azov battalion. In our media, we're hearing that these are only volunteer soldiers. They are called up and they are doing their duty. Only in the first time after 2014, in April, March, and the summer, late summer of 2014, you could hear also in Western mainstream media that these are right-wing battalions, very closely connected to right-wing parties, to neo-Nazi groups in other countries, also in Germany, for example. But now in the last years, these are only volunteer soldiers wanting the best for Ukraine. So let us remind that these are really right-wing neo-Nazis with tattoos of the swastika and the SS flags from the Second World War and these kind of things. So normally, of course, when they are captured in Russia, they would stand under trial because they are not the Ukrainian. They're not a part of the Ukrainian army. At the first time, there was standing under the command of the Interior Ministry of Ukraine. Now they are integrated into the army, I think. But these are all volunteer soldiers, volunteer fighters from many different countries, really Nazis and right-wing people. So why President Erdogan gave this permission to take these guys home? I don't know. It was maybe 8 or something. I don't remember exactly the number of these Azov commanders. I don't understand it. But as I say, Erdogan comes always up with some things you don't understand. On one side, he is playing the game with NATO. On the other side, he's trying to have good relations to Russia. This was an agreement between Turkey and Ukraine and Russia. And why he break it, I don't really know. I don't really understand it, to be honest.
Perhaps Costas, being a Greek, would have another
You're,
understanding
you're,
of Turkey and President Erdogan. Costas?
you're much closer.
Yes. Well, I think that we have to look at the big picture. Mr. Erdogan has just won a very difficult election, which the West did everything in its power that in order for him to lose, but he didn't. Erdogan is one of the world leaders who is probably a master of diplomatic equilibrium, as I call it. Diplomatic equilibrium means that you have to walk on a tight rope, and if there's no safety net under the rope, then you cannot always achieve what you're doing on a tight rope. You know, you're bound to fall sometime. But in any case, let's look at the big picture. Mr. Erdogan is quarreling with the leadership of NATO and Washington on the question of Sweden, as you know. He does have his own reserves. He's putting on the table some things that we know, that, for example, some so-called anti-Turkish or terrorists should be shipped back to Turkey. One of them is a member of parliament in the Swedish parliament. She's a Kurd. And he's asking also for the ending of mass rallies against Islam, which is happening in Sweden. Sweden does have an Islamophobia which is growing in this country and in other countries, of course. Then you have Turkey with an extreme difficult economic situation at this point, with incredible high rising inflation. The IMF is pressuring within and outside of Turkey in order for the IMF to get a foothold on the Turkish economy, which is not doing very well. But we know from world experiences, when the IMF comes to save you, it actually makes things worse. We know that in Greece very well with the Troika we had with IMF, the European Union, and the European Central Bank. So if you have all this on the board and on the table, the Azov thing that, you know, where Erdogan gave back to Ukraine, the Azov fighters breaking an agreement, an international tripart agreement between these three countries, as Hendrik mentioned, it's part of the big deal. And let us remember that next month, Mr. Putin will be visiting Turkey on an official visit. And already Mr. Erdogan has put out three things before the visit. One is that Russia should accept a prolongation of wheat exports for the wheat corridor to keep on keeping it alive, for wheat to be exported until the end of the year. He put out something that bothered the Russian Federation leadership quite a lot. A few days ago, he mentioned that Ukraine deserves to be a member of NATO. And at the same time, he's putting a lot of obstacles for Sweden to become a member of NATO. So if you look into the Turkish diplomatic school of policies, which is a very long strategy, you know, Turkish diplomatic policies are not made for the next month or the next year. They have a very long strategic, in a time lapse of things they want to get. So you have to look at Erdogan within this frame in order to try to understand what is he trying to achieve with the Azov fighters he gave back to Ukraine. It's part of this big deal and all these problems that Turkish diplomacy is tackling at this point, and they have to put everything on the table in order to get what they want. We'll see if it works out or not. We're still at the beginning of this, but it's quite interesting. I mean, Turkish diplomacy is very, very intelligent. It has been for centuries in the Ottoman Empire. They have a very long history of as we call it, world diplomatic equilibrium between big powers. So we'll see how it goes.
I'm just wondering if part of the strategy and the stuff that they have on the board has anything to do with the upcoming NATO meeting in Vilnius. Does he hope to get pats on the back? Does he hope to get some kind of compensation or agreement from NATO? And then you have the whole thing of Sweden, which he's holding in his hand. I mean, it's so convoluted and difficult to understand. And Costas, I think you gave us some really good insight on the Turkish mentality, the Turkish view towards strategic planning is not 1 or 2 years, but several years out, and based on what they want to achieve or accomplish or get, however you want to look at it. When I looked at it, I saw it as a slap in the face to President Putin. I was wondering if Putin was going to come out and say something. I don't believe he has. I was wondering what that had to do or would have anything to do with Russia-Turkish relations, because those relations have been very important for quite a number of years. There's so many things involved. There's trade. There's a nuclear plant they're talking about. There's another pipeline to go through Turkey. My goodness, it's really hard for a layman. And I'm a layman. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a military guy. It's really difficult for people to understand what the heck is going on. Any comments?
Well, go ahead, Hendrik. Go ahead.
I only want to say I don't think it will affect the diplomacy and the good relations between Russia and Turkey. Both countries are dependent on each other, and they both know that only together they can achieve their own goals. The goals are a little bit different, but I don't think it will affect the relation, this incident.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. You have to wonder if President Putin is not smarting a little bit from this backhand that he got from his trusted friend, right? Costas, I like the way you described it. Equilibrium, I think, diplomacy, like walking on a tightrope. I prefer to describe that type of diplomacy as straddling a picket fence.
Well, if I may add to that, just a thought. I agree with Hendrik that too much is at stake between Turkey and Russia as far as their bilateral relations on multilateral fields: food exports, energy, high tech. You have companies that have exited the Russian Federation, Western companies, which are working now in Turkey and re-exporting their goods back to Russia under the nose of the so-called embargoes imposed by the West. And the Western companies that are happy about it, they're not, they're making their money. They don't care if they're still working with Russian companies and Russian economy. So it does bring into the picture a more independent Turkey within NATO, but also a Turkey that has created a great, how can I say it? They are able to work within the domestic politics of other countries in the European Union. France and Germany are an example. You have a very large Turkish population in Germany, over 3.5, almost 4 million. Also, you have about 6 million Muslims within France, at least. And you have Turkish imams in the mosques of France doing political work within France. So Turkey is not a passive player as it used to be 30 or 40 years ago. It's much more active in interaction politics, culture, religion, geopolitics, military production, military equipment. They're the third largest country in exporting drones. They're working with Israel on the corridors of natural gas and oil with Lebanon and the northern Mediterranean, and trying to get Egypt into that deal. So Turkey is a big player now. They're not a small player, and we must look at them not in the way. I'll be a little bit autocritical, not as neo-colonial Greece, which is a player. What he's going to do the next minute, how he's going to act, what he's going to say, how he's going to react. And I'm talking about the Greek governments in the last 20 years or so. It's not the same with Turkey. It has to do with the economy, the growing exports, a very strong oligarchy, a very strong leader for their oligarchy. So, Turkey is not an easy player to get by. So I do believe that when Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan meet next month in Ankara, there'll be a lot to be said behind closed doors. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, well, thanks to both of you for those insights. With the time that we have left, I want to go to something that has bothered me ever since, 2014, but certainly way before that. But since 2014, the United States of America and its allies in the West have been step by step gradually escalating this war, the conflict in Ukraine. Just a few months ago, it was, we're going to send more tanks, Abrams tanks, German Leopard tanks, and these tanks are going to come from other countries that have already purchased them. And this was going to change the course of the war, but it hasn't. Now we're hearing that Joseph Biden has approved the transfer of cluster bombs, which have been outlawed and agreed upon by 110 nations around the world because of their danger not to combatants directly, but to civilians, and not only now during the war, but for generations afterwards. And the victims are innocent children who find them, don't realize what they are, it blows up and they're dead. Or somebody that is working in a garden, boom, a pitchfork goes in, the thing explodes and they die. So much of the world has realized how dangerous and evil these bombs are. But Russia, the United States, and Ukraine are not signatories to that international United Nations agreement. I don't want to focus just on the cluster bomb and the danger. I started out by saying the intensified escalation by the United States in this conflict against Russia, which has mainstream media now in America and in Europe talking about the extreme danger of nuclear war. I'd like your thoughts on that. And Hendrik, we'll start with you.
Oh, it's maybe the same question like after the Iraq war. Was it worth it? Yes, of course. It is. The US want to have this war against Russia, and that's why they need Ukraine for this kind of war, a proxy war. I think everybody knows it. Only we in the Western countries don't want to know or don't want to understand it. And as you say, the first time in the war, we say, yes, Germany said, we can only deliver some helmets or first aid packages or something like that. And now we are talking about F-16 fighter jets. And There is no end in this. Uh, as long as the US want to continue this and put money and effort in this war, it will continue, and they will deliver everything they have. And now their shelves are empty. They have no normal shells to deliver. I think all NATO countries are the stocks are quite empty. So that now they have to deliver whatever they have, and it doesn't matter if it's against some kind of international agreements or whatever. Who cares? The media will not write about it in the Western countries. And on the other side, Russia will find a way to deal with it, because even if you deliver F-16 fighter jets, it will not change anything in this war. I'm convinced that Russia will win in the end. Or we have to come to a diplomatical solution, which of course that would be the best. But this diplomatical solution we could have for 2 years ago already. But then Chancellor Merkel says the whole Minsk agreement was only to cheat Russia a little bit and to win a little bit time for Ukraine. So it's a really crazy situation, but I don't think that will stop. We will deliver everything we have. Human rights or something, it's not interesting for us. It's only some words for the newspapers and for the normal people. And as long as Washington wants this war, it will continue.
Costas, your thoughts?
Well, I will try to combine three things on the American military strategy along with Kiev. The first thing is that we have been bombarded by the Western media in our homes through the internet or through television, the big chains, media chains, that the Zaporizhia nuclear plant is in danger of a Russian sabotage. So, they are trying to infiltrate into our minds the possibility of a nuclear accident, which of course will aggravate the war itself in all fields. I mean, in all of Europe. This will be an incredible escalation of dangers, of nuclear dangers. So, first thing we have to answer to ourselves is who will gain from a nuclear accident in a power plant, which the Russians are running, the Russians are controlling, they're working in it, they're continuing its existence. Are they going to blow up their own energy plant? And what are they going to gain from that? That's the first question we have to ask ourselves. Then it's the cluster bombs. The cluster bombs, as you mentioned, I see it as a resort of panic from the military situation of the Ukrainian army and the mercenaries, the NATO mercenaries, which are working within the Ukrainian army above it or below it. And there seems to be thousands of them already. So NATO does have an involvement already in the war, not just indirectly by arming, but I do believe with officers and saboteurs and special commands that are working in the front lines or behind them. So I do strongly believe that the question of the cluster bombs is to create havoc in the civilian population of Lugansk and Donetsk. Because there can be no achievement of any victories on the battlefields in the air or in the Black Sea by the Ukrainian army. So they have to resort to this type of dirty war. War is dirty by itself, but even, as you mentioned, there are over 110 countries which do not adopt the killing mostly of children or being decimated, losing their arms and their legs, civilian population and mostly children, because most of these tiny cluster bombs look like toys, which might be deposited on the soil for months. And when they're picked up, as you say, then the end comes. Um, so the third thing I want to see is that as long as this so-called spring and right now summer offensive has stalled in reality, because there are no victories to be announced except for 3 or 4 villages which are not even close to the first line of Russian defense. So they're resorting to the escalation of armaments. So what is next? The dirty nuclear bomb, a dirty tactical nuclear weapon? What are they going to resort to? And as long as the European people are away from this situation and they don't want to face reality, because this will mean the end of Europe as we know it. If Holocaust starts in this way, the Americans have done it before. The Second World War, the First World War. They don't care about the European continent. I mean, the American leaders of the political system of the United States, they don't care about Europe as a continent itself. I mean, look at the economies of the Western European countries. Germany has lost its after-war very strong economy of exporting almost everything that has to do with machinery or high tech, and they're resorting to a war economy, which will mean that they will have deficits in the near future. So the European continent is going into deep poverty. The people of Europe are being put in a very dark tunnel with no light at the end. And they're resorting to neo-Nazi policies in many Western countries, adopting neo-Nazi parties, which they will resort to as their last political defense in order to continue their escalation towards the Russian Federation. It's a very troublesome picture, and if there is no movement, a European peace movement, and what really hurts me is that traditional peace movements, which existed for decades in Europe, are almost non-existent. I would say that the only person in Europe, and he's not a politician, who is trying hard, not with good results, trying to mediate between Moscow and Kiev, is the Pope, who in the last 8 months has sent more than 4 or 5 envoys to speak to both parties. He's the only one active on the question of diplomacy. Diplomacy has been abandoned because NATO is running the show.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous time, and you have to wonder when one of these escalations could really tip the balance, tip the scales, and we end up with Armageddon. And it does not necessarily have to be some crazy Dr. Strangelove in Washington in a bunker pushing the button. We are so close to an accident, a miscalculation, a misjudgment, a computer glitch, a failure in a radar, the collision of 2 planes, or even the shooting down of an American Predator drone, for example. Who knows what that could trigger? And so I think it is not hyperbole. It's not rhetoric to continue to emphasize how serious this situation is, not just for the Russian Federation and its future, but the future of all of us on this planet. I want to thank you both for joining me tonight. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I know a lot of people do appreciate it. When I say a lot, we're not talking tens of thousands. We might be talking a few hundred, but little by little, I think what we're doing is
very important as well.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks to both of you. We'll look forward to seeing you again, hopefully next Sunday or very soon.
Okay, take care. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.